understanding fundraising and charitable giving in ways that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Tyrone Freeman. Dr. Freeman leads the bachelor's program at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where he also resides as a leading nationally recognized scholar on a wide range of topics, including topics associated with diversity and philanthropy. And this is included in his recent book, Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow. I also need to let you know that Tyrone is a former associate director of the Fundraising School, which is why he is so familiar with the famous statement from our Fundraising School founder, Dr. Henry Rosso, that fundraising is the gentle art of teaching the joy of giving. And those of you who have attended the Fundraising School have heard us say that often. And Tyrone, you see that in the life of Madam C.J. Walker. Help us understand what we can learn from this important figure in history.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Thanks for having me on. I was really surprised and kind of had my heart warm when I came across the archives of Madam C.J. Walker and saw that 100+ years ago, she was talking about the joy of giving in a way that would have made Hank Rosso very proud. She talked about being a cheerful giver. And so she certainly was quoting scripture, a famous scriptural reference, but she also was articulating this sense that there is this great joy and comfort that comes from extending yourself to help others. And so she was very excited about the giving that she was doing across her lifetime. She wanted to have impact. And there's another example when she was working on her will during the last year of her life, in conversation with her attorney. She had some interesting conversations with him. And in one moment, she says to him, oh gosh, she's making provisions for charities. She's leaving behind money for loved ones and associates. And she just has this moment in a letter where she just says, oh, wow, I wish I could do this now. I wish it didn't have to happen after I passed away. I would get so much joy out of doing this and seeing this happen now. And so I think it's very powerful that, again, in the early 1900s, she's articulating this, because that was a time when we think about, it was called scientific philanthropy was the big way of thinking about giving. And it was much more focused on rationalism and applying scientific method to social problems. And people weren't talking about the emotion. They were trying to get away from emotions, right? So Madam Walker she was talking about this right in the middle of that kind of context, and reminds us of how it definitely feels good to give.
We encourage folks who are listening or viewing this podcast to look into our archives, where Dr. Freeman went into great detail about Madam Walker and her story. Tyrone, for the purposes here, if you could just give us the highlights again. Who is Madam C.J. Walker? Why was she important for you to write this book, especially as it relates to her philanthropic generosity?
Yeah, so Madam C.J. Walker was African-American entrepreneur and philanthropist. Was born in 1867 in Delta, Louisiana, on a cotton plantation. Her whole family had been enslaved. She was the first freeborn child. And she lives during the tumultuous time of Jim Crow segregation. She suffers under that system and has a very difficult early life. She was orphaned. She was widowed. She was a single mother, a migrant moving around the South while Jim Crow is being constructed around her and making life very difficult. She goes on to start a beauty cosmetics company that becomes very successful, and she headquartered it here in Indianapolis, where the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy is located. It became a tremendous success. She became very wealthy and a world-renowned figure, and her products are actually still sold today through Sephora. So she's created something that's enduring, that has changed hundreds of thousands of lives, and has been an inspirational story and a part of American history.
And thanks to your book, her story is enduring, including the story of her charitable giving. How can somebody be a cheerful giver as the daughter and granddaughter of slaves? How can somebody be a cheerful giver as somebody who was orphaned and who had all these challenges early in her life? How can that person be a cheerful giver, which again drives home this point about the joy of giving? Where did that come from?
Yeah, I think there are a range of influences. First, I think there was this cultural influence, because when she was having some of these most difficult points in her life, again, being an orphaned, widowed, single mother, she's helped by a group of church women in St. Louis, Missouri. And these church women were very generous. They were activists. They were actively taking care of people in their communities. Many of we talk about the migration of African Americans out of the South into the North as an important part of American history. Well, this church in particular was receiving many of those migrants, and there was no place for them to go, but they would take them into their homes, take them into their church, get them settled with housing and education. They really had this philanthropic social safety net that was constructed. And these were Black women doing this work. And so she was really mentored and supported by women like that who were exhibiting this kind of generosity. So I think it was definitely modeled for her, and she was socialized into it. She also became a very devout member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And that is a very famous African-American denomination that has always been on the front lines of the struggle for equality and used the gospel of Christ to engage in trying to make America better and live up to its promises regarding equality. And so within the AME Church, there were opportunities for her to serve, for her to hear sermons on charity and one's responsibility to each other, but also to be in this world where, again, in the larger Jim Crow world, but inside this institution, African Americans are leaders. African Americans are serving. African Americans are displaying and engaging their talents inside the church in a way that the larger society won't let them. So I think this is where she gets a larger vision for herself and thinks about the possibilities. And she also says in an interview with a newspaper in around 1912 that it was there in St. Louis that she learned it was her responsibility to help others and to do what she could with what she had.
And how the fates of history can be ironic. St. Louis is the city that launched the Dred Scott case. And then decades later, turned around the life of Madam C.J. Walker in a much more positive way. And it was influences from women in her life who helped her with this. And then you talked about her religious faith being so instrumental. Tyrone, it sounds like as you tell this story that she had this tremendous sense of gratitude, that she remembered where she came from and was giving out of her gratitude. First of all, am I understanding you correctly in that regard? And what lessons can fundraisers draw from her story today?
Absolutely. She definitely had a sense of gratitude. In fact, she says again in another interview that, even though she moved and lived in different cities during her lifetime, she always stayed connected to those charities in St. Louis that helped her. And she directly said, I gave because of the kindnesses that were shown to me there. And she left many of those organizations in her will. In fact, Indianapolis and St. Louis received a significant amount of her estate because those charities were so important and transformative and part of her life story. And so I think, it's important to give us that sense of how gratitude develops. And again, in the Jim Crow context, really a gift by an African American is really a form of hope, right? It's a hope that you can make something better. It's a hope that you can make a change. And so I think Madam Walker's part of that generation that built up these organizations like the NAACP and others and prepared them to be ready for the coming civil rights movement that really helped to revolutionize America. And that's the kind of generosity that's evident in the community and helps to sustain that. And that's still alive and well today. And so by reading the book, I think fundraisers can become more conversant with that culture and with that history, can understand the dynamics of the vibrant and robust landscape of African-American philanthropy as it exists today. There is so much going on, again, that doesn't always make the headlines, doesn't always make the media, or is not top of mind. But from the Black church to fraternal organizations to giving circles to affinity groups and capacity building groups, and not to mention a vibrant social media universe of Black philanthropy. There's so much going on, and for communities of color more broadly, that fundraisers would do well to become more conversant in so that they can actively go out and build equal opportunity for people to engage in their missions.
Tyrone, that is so well said, and also love this part of the story too, that she was grateful and cheerful as she was giving, and then she also, by the way, she made a planned gift. So fundraisers, don't leave that out.
That's right.
Madam C.J. Walker had a will and she donated to charity, so that's important to remember from this story as well. Tyrone,
Yes.
how would you summarize then lessons that can be learned here as fundraisers endeavor to diversify the professional fundraising field, as fundraisers look to diversify their donor databases in ways that are equitable and inclusive? First of all, this is just a fascinating story in and of itself, and thank you for recounting this for us. And then how can we apply this today?
Well, thank you. I think it gives us some things to think about in terms of, again, and where we look for philanthropy, how we think about who is a philanthropist. It broadens the definition and allows us to see it because it has always been here. This is something that has been foundational to American society, again, even though it's not always been visible. And so it's alive and well today. This will help you recognize it. It'll also give you some ways of thinking about engaging donors of color. I closed the book out by recounting some of the successes of the Smithsonian's campaign for the National Museum of African American History. I had the pleasure and opportunity of interviewing some fundraisers from that campaign, and really they rethought the structure of the campaign. They played around with giving levels. They created multiple avenues for engagement on top of this very culturally relevant case for support that just tapped into the hearts and soul of the American population and just unleashed untold generosity, and not just money. They broke records with their money, with their financial donations they received, but the volunteer docents, right? They had to shut down. There were so many people that wanted to volunteer. They didn't have enough room for them. And then the artifacts, over 40,000 artifacts procured or donated by everyday average people like us, right? It caused them, it touched them so much that they went underneath the bed and into the garage and into the attics and pulled out those precious heirlooms and gave them over to the institution because they saw them as someone worthy who respected them, understood the tradition, and wanted them and welcomed them to be a part of the mission and the vision. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from that successful campaign and from this history more broadly.
Let's remember that when we fundraise, we're providing people with an opportunity to be a cheerful giver, regardless of their gender, their race, their background, their economic class, whether we would expect them to be a giver when we don't expect, perhaps, due to our own biases or background, for them to not be a giver. All of those lessons come forward in such a passionate, engaging, exciting way in this new book, Madam C.J. Walker's Gospel of Giving, Black Women's Philanthropy During Jim Crow, written so wonderfully by our colleague, Dr. Tyrone Freeman. And again, Dr. Freeman also in his spare time leads our bachelor's program. And these are the types of topics that we dive into with our academic students at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level. The master's degree, by the way, now entirely online. And more information is available at philanthropy.iupui.edu. If you add the / and the fundraising school, that's where you learn about our public courses through the fundraising school, as well as our custom training. These podcasts are quarterly webinars. We get together once a month, Fridays with the fundraising school, just to gather as a field and have conversations. And you'll also find information about our crisis response scholarship, where you can attend a course from the fundraising school at a 50% discount. With Dr. Tyrone Freeman, I'm Bill Stanjikevich, and now you are more fully informed on this first day from the fundraising school.